Hello and welcome back. In this video we're going to be taking a look into the different archetypes in Ashes of Creation. This video will look over all the archetypes in general, however will not go into specific abilities. This is due to not all archetypes having their abilities disclosed just yet. However, if you still want me to look into the archetypes that do have their abilities disclosed, we can take a look into each archetype individually. If you're a fan of Ashes of Creation content, please do feel free to subscribe. The next video we're going to have is going to be covering PvP. What will be covered in this video are the different archetypes and the classes within them, as well as a general overview on class abilities and augments, as well as what skill points are. Ashes of Creation has the traditional trinity of tank, DPS, and support/healer roles. Although traditional roles are present, you should not feel branded by their primary archetype. Skill augments available throughout the class system allow characters to be more personalised outside their primary role. Ashes of Creation comes with 8 different archetypes. One of these archetypes can be chosen as a primary archetype, and then later another can be chosen as a secondary archetype. However, players can also double down on their archetype choice to have it as their primary and secondary role to strengthen their choice. When a player chooses their primary archetype, this is permanently fixed and cannot be changed. However, upon choice of a secondary archetype, this will have the opportunity to be able to be changed later. So now to cover what are the 8 archetypes. We have Tank, Fighter, Rogue, Ranger, Mage, Cleric, Summoner and Bard. These 8 archetypes can then be formed in combinations to form a total of 64 different classes, of which I'll go through as we go through the 8 archetypes. First up we have the Tank archetype. A tank's job is to control a fight, to help the party mitigate incoming damage and dictate who gets hit. Tanks will have different build options such as evasion tanks, control tanks and shield tanks. All classes with tank as primary archetype will be viable for tanking at upper end raids. Now we go through the different classes with tank as their primary archetype. We have Argent, which is a mix between tank and bard. Guardian, which is tank as secondary and primary. Keeper, which is tank and summoner. Knight, which is tank and fighter. Night Shield, which is tank and rogue. Paladin, which is tank and cleric. Spell Shield, which is tank and mage. And Warden, which is tank and ranger. Next up we have the Fighter archetype. The Fighter is an expert in physical combat, a master of many weapons. This warrior strikes fear into the heart of his foes. The different classes we have with Fighter as the primary class are Blade Caller with Fighter and Summoner, Blade Dancer with Fighter and Bard, Dreadnought with Fighter and Tank, High Sword with Fighter and Cleric, Hunter with Fighter and Ranger, Shadow Blade with Fighter and Rogue, Spell Sword with Fighter and Mage, and Weapon Master with Fighter and Fighter. Our next archetype is the Rogue. The Rogue is a master of opportunity, using skill, positioning and the environment to dish out frightening amounts of damage. In their downtime, they provide a solid utility, helping their friends to navigate dangers otherwise unseen. The classes we have with Rogue as their primary archetype: Assassin with Rogue as its primary and secondary role, Charlatan with Rogue Bard, Cultist with Rogue Cleric, Duelist with Rogue Fighter, Nightspell with Rogue Mage, Predator with Rogue Ranger, Shadow Guardian with Rogue Tank, and Shadow Lord with Rogue Summoner. Whilst all classes are capable adventurers, rogues excel at delving into the deepest dungeons and finding the most hidden of treasures. Rogues will have utility skills that enable them to discover hidden doors, traps, and additional treasures. These will be randomly spawned throughout different times of the day to ensure that encounters are not the same each time. If you're in a party and you have a rogue that's available, they'll be able to use that utility to discover these random doors that might exist within a dungeon. Because these locations are randomly spawned through different times of the day, changing the dungeon at different times, this means it to be important and relevant for parties to make sure that they have a diversity of archetypes available to them. And in particular, for the rogue's case, because they can find those hidden type doors and then have access to different types of loot that's available from this. However, to clarify for you future rogues, there will not be a pickpocketing mechanic in regards to living players, and players will not be able to be robbed while occupying their player's stall inside the limits of a node. Next up we have the Ranger. Death from afar is the Ranger's forte. A master of the bow and ranged combat, the Ranger is more than happy to let others get their hands dirty. No one else has such a keen eye in natural environments. The different classes we have for Ranger, with the Ranger as the primary archetype, are Bowsinger, Ranger and Bard, Falconer as Ranger and Summoner, Hawkeye with Ranger and Ranger, Scion with Ranger and Mage, Scout with Ranger and Rogue, Sentinel with Ranger and Tank, Soulbow with Ranger and Cleric, and Strider with Ranger and Fighter. To clarify a couple of things for you future Rangers, a character may equip up to 2 one-handed weapons and also wear a ranged weapon on their back. Characters performing ranged abilities will switch to the ranged weapon and then can switch back to their melee weapon and shield or two-handed melee weapon. The weapon held in the main hand slot determines the active weapon ability. However, something to keep in mind is Rangers are going to have a minimum distance requirement when they're eligible to use their ranged weapons, and therefore aren't likely to be able to use it at point blank. Next up, we have the Mage archetype. In a world of high magic, no party would be complete without a mage. Masters of the arcane, they bring terrible elements to bear in devastating spells. If reality needs changing in some fashion, ask a mage to help. The different classes we have with Mage as their primary archetype are Acolyte with Mage and Cleric, Archwizard with Mage and Mage, Battle Mage with Mage and Fighter, Shadowcaster with Mage and Rogue, Sorcerer with Mage and Bard, Spell Hunter with Mage and Ranger, Spellstone with Mage and Tank, and Warlock with Mage and Summoner. Something for those of you looking forward to magic is there will be elements such as air, fire, water and lightning, and each with their own resistances. Other elemental influences may include darkness, light and planar. Elements may have more influence in a certain season and climate. For example, frost abilities will be stronger in winter. This affects both PvE and PvP. There may be ley lines and strong magical planes in the world that change or alter the way spells work. Mages will offer 4 elemental schools of augmentation, such as teleportation, fire, frost, and lightning. Say for instance I'm a ranger that has a charge bolt ability as my primary active skill, and I've chosen Mage as my secondary and applied my elemental augmentation to it. I now have a frost charge bolt, and if I fire this bolt and it hits a target, they may be freezing for a period of time, and as a debuff, this might slow their speed. Another one of the schools for Mage is the teleport school. You could potentially take that teleport augment and apply it to your charge skill. Now instead of charging over a distance, you're going to immediately teleport to the target, dealing an amount of damage and giving a condition modifier. Our next archetype is the Cleric. In such a dangerous world, a Cleric is never wanting for friends, that can protect their allies in a number of ways when necessary, and snuff the life out of others. Masters over the very essence of life, they can sense the broken and corrupted. The different classes we have underneath the Cleric archetype with Cleric as their primary archetype are Apostle with Cleric and Tank, High Priest with Cleric and Cleric, Oracle with Cleric and Mage, Protector with Cleric and Ranger, Scryer with Cleric and Bard, Shadow Disciple with Cleric and Rogue, Shaman with Cleric and Summoner, and Templar with Cleric and Fighter. Classes with Cleric as a secondary archetype are able to choose between life or death augments. Choosing life augments will provide the ability to provide self-healing benefits as well as limited life-giving benefits to other players. Some Cleric augments apply to certain skills which indirectly provide the ability to heal others. These will not replace the need for a Cleric archetype. Cleric augments will radically change the types of summons available for the Summoner primary archetype. Skeletons, zombies, and other undead summons will be possible with death-based augments. Now for the Summoner archetype. The Summoner is never alone. 2 hands are good, but in the Summoner's opinion, 4 hands are always better. With the right tool for every job, there's no situation they can't handle. Summoners can shift their roles easily to fill gaps in a group's composition. The different classes within Summoner, with Summoner being the primary archetype, is Beastmaster with Summoner and Ranger, Brood Warden with Summoner and Tank, Conjurer with Summoner and Summoner, Enchanter with Summoner and Bard, Necromancer with Summoner and Cleric, Shadowmancer with Summoner and Rogue, Spellmancer with Summoner and Mage, and Wildblade with Summoner and Fighter. Classes with Summoner as a secondary may grant augmented skills that summon weapons, however these weapons aren't able to be equipped. The word equip only applies to items. There are currently no plans to include summoning items into a player's inventory or character slots. It may however be possible to change the appearance and damage type or data of a weapon through the use of a spell. There are summoned weapons that appear as a spell visual effects to damage opponents for a period of time. These were not able to be wielded since wielding implies an item a character can equip. A summon's appearance is determined by in-game choices, for example a class-specific appearance, which the Shadow Master may have shadow summons, as well as also being determined by race-specific appearance. Summoners may also change the appearance of their summons through in-game items and cosmetics that will be offered, potentially through a summon creation suite based on the animal husbandry system. Last but not least, we have the Bard archetype. Truly a force multiplier, the Bard weaves songs of glory and conquest, inspiring his comrades to even greater heights. The Bard knows secret and powerful words, is able to speak into being terrible nightmares or convince foes to become friends. Bards are intended to amplify a party's or raid's ability to perform within their own class. That amplification isn't just intended for DPS, but also for support, for healing, for tanking damage, for movement. The buffs a Bard can give are going to be related directly to how they perform. The different classes within Bard as Bard with the primary archetype are Magician as Bard and Mage, Minstrel as Bard and Bard, Siren as Bard and Tank, Song Warden as Bard and Ranger, Songcaller as Bard and Summoner, Soulweaver as Bard and Cleric, Tailsword as Bard and Fighter, and Trickster as Bard and Rogue. Now that we've taken a look into all of the archetypes, let's take a generalized look into how augments affect primary skills. Primary skills, aka class abilities, are based on a player's archetype. Players can personalize their primary skills with augmentation from 4 different areas: secondary archetype augments, racial augments, religious augments, and social organization augments. The design behind augments is to not just change the flavor so it reflects the secondary archetype a character has chosen, but so it also fundamentally changes the core components of a primary skill. Each secondary archetype offers 4 different schools of augmentation. Each augment school affects a primary archetype skill in different ways. For example, a mage offers teleportation and elemental schools of augments. These augments will affect a fighter's primary skills differently than a cleric's. Each augmentation has a level requirement and number of skill points required to activate it. There's going to be a certain threshold at which you can no longer augment your active abilities based on the decisions you've augmented previous abilities, so you'll have to pick and choose which ones you want to apply your augments towards, and certain augments will have more expense required on the skill point side. If a player wants to choose the same primary and secondary archetype, this increases the focus on that archetype. Augments to primary skills will fundamentally change the way an ability works, adapting what the ability once did to incorporate the identity of the secondary archetype. The progression system for augments is very similar to the class progression system. Changing your augments on your skills will require you to go to an NPC in a village node or higher. Some spell colours and general effects change based upon augments. Active skills could look totally different after an augment gets applied. Racial augments are based on a character's race and are available to each character no matter what class they are. These racial augments apply to abilities on a character's primary archetype. They affect how the ability works and can also apply cosmetic effects. Race won't be a matter of looks with random abilities, instead it integrates deeply into the class system, augmenting and changing the basic chassis provided by the 8 core archetypes, with the goal in mind being to create a system where an elven fighter feels different but serves the same role as a dwarven fighter. Strong religions provide unique augments that can be applied to a player's primary skills. Religious augments are considered top-tier achievements within a religion. These augments can be stacked on top of class augments. They will have a give and take system based on the choices a player makes. You're going to have advancement within a religion and within the church that you're a part of. Those advancements are going to be both reflective of the community's development of that religion out in the world, via building temples, building infrastructure, and completing certain quests. You'll then benefit from the community's development of that specific religion by gaining certain augment abilities that apply on top of the secondary class augments to skills, and it's going to reflect on the nature of that religion. Social organizations are also able to grant up to 3 or 4 augments based on whether an organization is the patron of their node, meaning it contributes the most amount of work to the node from its members, or a player's progression within that organization. So while talking about augments, we briefly mentioned skill points, so let's take a quick look into what skill points are. Players receive skill points as they level. These can be used to level up skills within their active, passive, or combat skill trees. It will not be possible to max all skills within a skill tree. In terms of skill progression, players can choose to go wide and get a number of different abilities, or go deep into a few specific abilities. However, do not worry if you feel like at any point you may have misallocated your skill points, as players are able to reset and reallocate their skill points. With a system where active skills are capable of receiving additional skill point allocations and unlocking additional features, it's going to be up to the player whether or not you want to be more diverse but less in depth in some of these skill choices. With all this being said, this then takes us to the end of the video. I've tried to cover each area with as much information as I could at this point in time with the information that I have. Hopefully this has helped you learn something about all the different archetypes and classes within Ashes of Creation, and also how augments and skill points work. If you liked the video, I'd highly appreciate it if you gave the video a like. Obviously, if you didn't like it, feel free to give a dislike, as it's the way I get feedback from you. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment below the video. I do my best to read through all the comments and leave a reply if any questions have been posted. The last thing I've got to say is, if you want to stay tuned and see future videos, please feel free to subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you next time.